All right, let's stay with the story now and speak to Abie Isaacs, the chairperson of the Cape Flats Safety Forum, and Nkosikhona Swaartbooi, the coordinator at the Movement for Collective Action and Racial Equity. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Isaacs. There's been mixed reaction to the deployment, the news of the deployment of the army. Briefly, give us your reaction.
Good evening, and good evening to your viewers. As the Cape Flats Safety Forum, we have been calling since 16 December, to be precise, 2022, for the South African Defence Force to be deployed as a force multiplier to the South African Police Services. At that stage already we could pick up. We are not citizens, we are not in the police, we are just ordinary community members. At that stage we could pick up already that crime is out of control. We've been advocating for this notion since then, up until now. So firstly, we welcome the decision by the President of the Republic of South Africa for the deployment of the South African Defence Force as a force multiplier to the South African Police Services. We've consistently been saying that the Cape Flats is under siege. They are urban terror, and that's the words and that's the terminologies that we've been using. The Cape Flats, there's urban terror that's happening. So for us as the Cape Flats Safety Forum, yes, we hold and we believe there's the two schools of theory. The one school of theory that says the army is not equipped to deal with it. I think for the benefit, you know, during the COVID period, we had the soldiers deployed, we had the South African Defence Force deployed. Even if you look at crime stats during that period, you would see there's a reduction. Yes, we also know that.
Mr. Isaacs, pardon me. I'm going to circle back to that point because it's important, and there's a question I want to ask you about that in just a moment. Let me bring in Nkosikhona into the conversation. Nkosikhona, your reaction quickly.
Good evening to you and to the viewers at home. I think it is very difficult for us in Cape Town, specifically on the urban peripheries of the city, to accept the decision made by the president to deploy the soldiers to come and deal with a very complex issue around not just policing, but a question of safety in Cape Town. And this is not just an easy, point to deal with, because it's regarding people's lives. Crime is not just an issue that ought to be dealt with by the police only. Crime is complex. It's got socioeconomic impact in terms of people's lives, and it's one of the drivers that drives people to be part of these gang and gun violence that we see in the city of Cape Town. This is also not new. In 2019, the South African National Defence Force was deployed in the city of Cape Town, about 1,000 personnel in crime hotspots such as Khayelitsha, Nyanga, Mitchells Plain, Delft, and Gugulethu. Despite these efforts, violent crime, gang activity, gun-related incidents remain high, demonstrating the limitations of enforcement, heavy, punitive approach. And for us, crime ought to be addressed as a social issue, but also policing has to be a part of it. It can't be just addressed by, for us sending the army to places like Khayelitsha and the Cape Flats is more of putting a band-aid into a wound that has not been treated. There are underlying issues that it brings about crime that we have to deal with. We should not be shy to deal with those issues and look for short-term solutions to the issues that are temporary in our society.
Nkosikhona, I'm going to circle back to that in just a moment because the president did touch on that in his State of the Nation address. But Mr. Isaacs, let me come back to you. The president, right, speaks about how he's directed the police minister and the defense, the SANDF, to be able to develop a tactical plan on where security forces can be deployed within the next few days. That's according to the statement they addressed last week. But we've seen deployments in the past. You listen to what Nkosikhona has had to say. There have been concerns that are raised about a lack of coordination between the SAPS and members of the SANDF, and thus treating it as if it's a momentarily bandage, but then as soon as they leave, back to square one. How do you respond?
I think first and foremost, we are clear as the Cape Flats Safety Forum. We understand the mandate of the South African Defence Force. That's number one. Number two, I think when we've called for the South African Defence Force is to stabilize the area, all these areas that is infested I think, and I would agree with what my colleague is saying. Yes, we've called for the South African Defence Force based on one thing, that the South African police services within this province were not able to deal with some of these issues. Yes, we do. When we speak about crime, it's a complex situation. Hence, we are saying, whilst the South African Defence Force is here, whether it's 3 months, whether it's 6 months, it gives the opportunity for the three spheres of government. If you can recall, just 2024, the three spheres of government have signed a pact to look at specifically around safety and security. A year later, nothing has come out of that one. So clearly for us, it gives them the opportunity for the three spheres to go back to the drawing board and look and relook at the nuts and bolts. Over and above that, when we look at crime, we also need to be cognizant of the fact we need society, broader society, to play that role. FBOs, CBOs, NGOs, civil society needs to play a role. So when we look at it, we need to look at whole of government approach and a whole of society approach.
Yeah.
I think the point that we are making, the fact that the minister will be here in Mitchell's Plain, an area where we are residing, on the 9th of September, stating publicly there is no plan to deal with gang violence. Who next? Who would be the next call? So from that perspective, it clearly then puts a perspective to say that the police, in terms of the police generally, have failed, hence the calling,
Right.
hence the deployment of the South African Defence Force.
So, Nkosikhona, the president, in his address, says that government, while this is happening, government will then be implementing what he's calling an integrated strategy to address the root causes of crime through what they're calling coordinated interventions across society, from street lighting to access to social services. Can this help, and what should it look like?
We think if an approach is taken to actually start where many of the commissions and the initiatives have ended, we can get somewhere. For instance, in 2014, there was a Kailicha Commission of Inquiry, which highlighted similar systemic challenges, recommending improvement in policing performance, the resource allocation, accountability, community trust, infrastructure, and recognition of vigilante killings. And 7 years later, many of these recommendations, I think it's about 10 years now, more than 10 years now, they remain unimplemented, highlighting the limits of enforced focused approaches. So we do have initiatives that have actually looked into how we can root out crime in our communities. If the soldiers are to come to the Cape Flats today, how are they going to police the informal settlements where it's dark, where there are no streets and there are only passages, and the police themselves fear going there? Where does this put communities? Where are these soldiers going to be deployed? For how long will they be there? What is the role of the community as the main stakeholder in relation to the safety question? So this leaves a lot of questions unresponded to. We need to not look for shortcuts. We need to not only be looking for political PR stunts, but we need to root out crime in our communities. And where that starts is in communities. When have we had a conversation about the depth of the gang violence in our communities? When has government convened spaces for community members to actually contribute in coming up with solutions in relation to addressing these issues? It will not help us to just impose the army now, because just like 2019, what will happen after the army has left? Because now, crime and the gun violence increased right after the withdrawal of the SANDF, and that is where our comments are around to say this is a moment for us to imagine what solutions exist that we can implement, that we haven't even implemented. The Commission of Inquiry that was done for the Kailicha community is one that has got some of the answers that we should be looking into. We can't just be saying that the issue of policing or the issue of safety is one that the police must be implementing only. There's housing, human settlements, in terms of ensuring that safety is also maintained. There's basic services that people get measured on their way to accessing things like toilets, water, and sanitation. So we need to have a multi-pronged approach that brings together all of these stakeholders into the table, and not for the police to be just, highlighted to say they must be the only ones who resolve this issue. We don't believe that that will assist in doing anything in communities. We're calling for an engagement in terms of one that is inclusive, that will also take into consideration civil society that has done a lot of work around this, as well as community members. I know today of four leaders who are serving in the policing forum who have been murdered. One of them from Guguletu, who is someone that I have worked with. And this will continue for as long as communities are left to fend by themselves. We need to be brought into the main table for us to inform what types of strategies will work in our communities, because we know our communities better than the police, better than anyone else, because we live in those communities and we have an interest in making sure that those communities are safe.
Abie, I'm going to give you the last word here. Do you think that the issues, if they are addressed with all of you at the table, and I know we've seen the minister, as you've alluded to, even last year coming through, but also different spheres of government, as far as human settlements, what Nkosikhona is saying, and with all of you at the table, will that help at all?
Again, as I said, that we need a multifaceted approach to deal with what we call urban terror. We also need to take cognizance of the fact that we're in the city of Cape Town, a city of two tales, as we call it. Just recently now, it's the new debate of the wall on the into R300, those type of things. Again, and one does not want to begin to politicize, to come across to be a politician. We need to acknowledge that the previous safety plan 2019 to 2024 was a complete failure. Where at one stage, funding was used from one department to other department to specifically safety and security. But if you look at the stats, doesn't paint the correct picture. It paints another different picture. So one, we need a multifaceted approach. Two, the three spheres of government in terms of the memorandum, they need to go back to the drawing board and see where they need, where's the shortfalls, and start tidying up on those things. Three, whole of government approach, whole of society approach. Civil society needs to come together, and the common factor and the common denominator, what we've picked up also, is that there seems to be resistance, or there seems to be fight amongst civil society movements as well. That also creates the opportunity for these gangs and for these gangs to mushroom. But for now, and I think my colleague have moved into another direction, there's the Kailitsa Commission of Inquiry report. The other report that is critical is the redacted Judge Tulare report, where the Judge Tulare have made a finding to suggest, and I'm saying to suggest, that gangs were infiltrating the South African police services. The Premier have released a report, a redacted report. Where is that report? I think, and I'm going into another space now, if I'm not mistaken, December month, some political party have called for a commission of inquiry, like like an ad hoc committee, so that we can go deeper into what is actually happening. Is there possibly a force operating?
Let me thank you both for your time. And as both of you are saying, lots of questions that need answers. And I do hope that we get to circle back to this, because it does seem that while this is, as you say, Abie, temporary, it might need to also have a long-term effect on dealing with crime. And Nkosikhona, the questions you have valid. Thank you so much to you both for your time, and do appreciate it. Abie Isaacs, Chairperson of the Cape Flats Safety Forum, and Nkosikhona Swaartbooi, Coordinator at the Movement for Collective Action and Racial Equity.